How do I sound? Brian, does it sound good?
All right, we're going to reconvene, ladies and gentlemen. So, just want to take a second to introduce Sebi and Sergio.
I'm Sebi. And I'm Sergio.
And these guys are the key designers for the software. The improvements in the user interface and the functionality are in great part thanks to their design efforts. And this new functionality that we're announcing today is just amazing. And they did a great job integrating our 22 protocols into realization in the software. So we look forward to learning more about it. At least I do.
Thank you. So, my microphone, excuse me. So in case you're wondering, we are twins. You can tell us apart because he has a beard. So, Sergio Beard, that's how you can tell us apart. I'm trying. I'm getting there. Just to tell you a little bit more about what we do, I focus on testing, user documentation, and support. So if you have any bugs or issues, then a lot of times you'll be interfacing with me via email or our support desk. And my technical title is Director of Product Design for NetPoint, which means that I spend a lot of time conducting user research, designing the actual features that go into the software, and then prioritizing them, and then kind of helping coordinate the releases when we roll those out. And we've both been a part of the NetPoint development team since about 2008, so our roles have varied over the years, but we have our stamp of approval on everything that goes out. And so if you have any feature requests, like Tim alluded to in the earlier session, you definitely feel free to reach out to us because we spend a lot of time, discussing those and prioritizing those. So now, our basic goal for today is to give you an overview of Schedule IQ and show you how to really start using it. As Tim alluded to, this is a new tool that we actually just released last week in version 5.2. We started passing around some thumb drives for people who, if you're interested, to update so you can try to follow along with some of the stuff we'll be doing. But if not, that's okay. We'll distribute the same file after the session and you can play around with it on your own time as well. Now, the structure of our session and how we are going to be doing this is by going through what we call primary, secondary, and tertiary analyses. But before we get into each one of those, we're just going to start with an overview. And at the end of the session, if time permitting, we have some key reference materials, some documentation that we can go through, which I believe should have also been printed and distributed. Did we get those handed out before the session? Yeah, so we can pass those around. There's just some extra documentation for you to read over as we're going through and talking about some of the features of Schedule IQ. So what is Schedule IQ? It's actually a new companion application to NetPoint. And its primary purpose, of course, is to give you the ability to analyze and determine the reliability of your schedules. Now, we opt to choose a word like reliability, for example, because it means some different things than quality. And this corresponds to the core traits of a reliable schedule protocol that dozens of PMA's best and brightest actually got together in 2013 to codify. And the core traits of a reliable schedule really document what the 20 core characteristics are that produce a reliable schedule. And this is important because this is really the guiding framework that Schedule IQ as an application is based on. Now, we're not going to be going through the protocol per se in detail, but we also have some copies up here at the front, and it can be downloaded from our website if you're interested in learning more about the full protocol. Some important points about this protocol are that they apply to primarily design, build, bid, build construction projects, and these are also major projects which tend to be between $250 million to $1 billion. These are, of course, construction projects, projects that begin with contract and
proceed through closeout and are typically about of a duration between 27 to 40 months. So what does it actually look like? Well, this is a screenshot of basically the summary tab, kind of the first thing you'll see when you fire it up. And we've got some different tabs across the top for different categories of metrics that we're gonna walk you through. And one of the first things you'll see here is, of course, a score. In this case, 50. We're telling you that your schedule is only marginally reliable, but we're going to show you how to improve that. And so what exactly is the schedule IQ score, you may wonder? Now, the score itself is a value between 0 and 100, and it's comprised of 42 individual metrics. And these are calculated based off some of the core traits of the reliable schedule protocol. Now, these schedule IQ scores can fall in one of 5 ranges, going from highly reliable at the top to unreliable, as you just saw in that last example. And the 42 metrics that we're talking about here are grouped into these 4 categories, which correspond to the tabs across the top of the interface. And this shows you, just in a little bit more detail, the distribution of how those metrics are organized. And this will make a little bit more sense when we dive into the interface and start going through it in the demo portion, but for now, this will give you a kind of an idea of how things are situated. Now, these 4 categories, comprehensive, credible, well-built, and controlled, directly correspond to categories from the core traits, and they are also actually used by the Government Accountability Office Schedule Assessment Guide. So what are they? Comprehensive tends to capture things like activities and their durations, whether or not you have all the detail in there, whether or not important dates are represented, whether or not you have properly resource loaded, coded, and assigned activities to WBS nodes. The next pillar, credible, captures things like the critical path and total floats, and whether or not the values of these are reliable in a sense, and whether or not you have risk assessed your schedule and factored weather into your schedule. And weather is actually going to be an important topic of some of our sessions tomorrow, and we're going to go into more detail about that in those upcoming sessions. Now, moving on, well-built, this captures things like your use of milestones and the type of logic you've used in your network, whether or not you've used constraints, and the appropriate use of calendars. And the last one, controlled. Controlled represents kind of as you're updating the schedule, whether or not you're progressing on plan, and whether or not activities are out of sequence, things of that nature.
We'll be giving you a test on that, so I hope everyone memorized it all.
So again, this is just showing you what the 42 individual metrics are by these pillars. Let me go ahead here. And actually, as you can see, they're actually also grouped under what we call IQ metrics. And these things like aligned, predictive, hierarchical, weather that you see across the top, those actually correspond also to the 20 core traits directly. So we've got the categories on the top, we've got the 20 core traits themselves as kind of subheadings, and then this next level are the 42 individual metrics that produce your overall schedule IQ score. So the first type of analysis we're going to be doing is the primary analysis, and this basically means that before you open up Schedule IQ and you look at your score, you've got to do a little bit more finessing for that score to become meaningful, because Schedule IQ needs to get a little bit more input from you, some basic information about the schedule before that score is useful. Now specifically, this refers to telling Schedule IQ what level of project you have. If it's a level 1, level 2, level 3, some of the metrics actually change based on what level of schedule you have. We also need to tell Schedule IQ the definition of criticality that you're using. For instance, how many days of flow determines whether or not an activity becomes critical. If our schedule is an update and we've run a risk analysis on it, we need to set a completion likelihood and attach a base case file and a corresponding likelihood of completion too. And finally, we need to fill out what we call the narrative questionnaire or the narrative checklist. And these are a series of questions that kind of like spot checks to determine whether or not the schedule, you've accounted for all the proper characteristics that you should be planning for. And with that, we can go ahead and dive into the actual demo, and we'll start with the primary analysis.
Thank you. Just a quick point I want to make. Some of these things might sound kind of weird, like why are we doing this? This is what is going to make Schedule IQ really go the extra distance compared to other schedule rating systems, right? A lot of other schedule quality scores just look at the network, right? And maybe they give you a score based on 10 metrics. But this what is really distinguishes Schedule IQ score from those other rating systems. And you'll see as we dive into these. So the first thing we want to do is set the level and the revision. So how do we do that? So if you see over here in NetPoint, there's two ways to open up Schedule IQ. If you're in NetPoint, go up to the metrics menu at the top and choose Open Metrics Manager. Now, if you want to open an XER file and run a metrics analysis on that, you can do that too. We're not going to have time to go through that right now, but I can tell you you'll have a shortcut on your desktop that says Schedule IQ with our Schedule IQ icon, and you just double-click that icon and you choose your XER file. For the most part, the processes are, there it is, are very similar. And any differences I will point out during this presentation though. All right, so we want to set the level. So what level is the schedule? What are we talking about here? So for those of you who aren't so familiar with schedule levels, I'm just going to show this quick table. This is actually from the core traits of a reliable schedule. It gives very, very detailed definitions of what is a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And you can go through this on your own time if you're not familiar and you really want to learn it. For our purposes, we're going to just use a slightly easier definition here, and that's just based on the majority of activity durations in your schedule. Okay, and again, you can see these. You'll be able to access these PowerPoint slides. You can download them from our website, so you can see these definitions for your own use. So we can go ahead and choose level 2. I know that this schedule that we're using as example happens to be about level 2, 3. And you might be wondering, well, why am I setting the level? So there's actually a number of the 42 calculations, indicators, that are level dependent. So we look at it and we say, well, the threshold should be different for a level 3 schedule or different for a level 2 schedule. Or maybe some metrics just aren't applicable to a level 4 schedule, right? And you can see those summarized over here. For example, your logic index, right? Number of, and this is talking about number of activities compared to number of links. And don't worry if I'm going over a little quickly right now, but we're going to go in more detail during the demo. Okay, so we can set our level, and you see that the window that Sergio has open right now is just our generic inputs window, and this is where we're doing most of these settings. Below that, we see an option for the revision, okay? And the revision, we have 3 options, and this is just based on progress in your schedule. Do you have a day-to-day? Have you status activities or not? There's a little bit of smartness that goes on. If there is a day-to-day, we won't even let you choose an unprogressed baseline because that just doesn't make sense, right? So we can go ahead and choose an unprogressed baseline for this example. And same here. I mean, depending on the revision of your schedule, some metrics are going to be turned off behind the scenes because they're not applicable. And you can just see those summarized over here. Things like out-of-sequence logic. I mean, that's not relevant for an unprogressed baseline. Things like that. You can see that summarized in this table. Same for revised baseline and for updates. And this is just showing you, so the ones in gray are the ones that are removed out of the 42. They're removed behind, underneath the hood. So that's the first step. Easy, right? Just a couple settings. Next up, we want to talk about the criticality thresholds. So what is that? This is an input for deciding when an activity shows up as critical in NetPoint. So when it shows up red, right? And typically it's based on total flow. In Schedule IQ, now we have an option to also set it by percent. So typically it's just 0 days, right? That's what we usually think of when we think of a critical activity. It has 0 total flow. But now you'll be able to choose if you want a percentage. So you could say, and we also have near criticality. So 5% of the remaining duration of your schedule will be considered near critical, or 1%. And that, as I mentioned, looks at the duration from the day-to-day to the project finish. Something to keep in mind if you're using percentage to define your criticality. We recommend that you always think of this in tandem with your schedule margin, which is, right, how much buffer do you have at the end of the schedule? And we'll be coming back to this shortly to show you what I mean. For now, we can just leave it at 0.
I have a question.
Sure. Yeah.
What is the industry?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we're not going over all of these, but industry is at this point just a category that you can use to help organize.
It has a predetermined threshold for.
So industry does not factor into the Schedule IQ score at this point.
It's more a qualitative input for you to just use for yourself.
So benchmarking purpose.
Eventually.
Exactly. Yeah. But industry budget, industry and budget are just for your own purposes and for benchmarking in the future, as you astutely identified. Okay. So now, if relevant, and this may not always be the case, you want to set the completion likelihood and the base case. We're going to go over each of these quickly here too. So a base case, what we mean is any version of your schedule from an earlier point in time. So this could be your unprogressed baseline, a revised baseline, or just even an earlier update. And this is going to be used for a couple metrics that are comparison based. And in Schedule IQ of the 42, there's 1. And we also have DCMA 14-point assessment metrics available in Schedule IQ. And of course, if you're familiar with those from the Defense Contract Management Agency, 2 of their metrics also are comparison based. And we'll be showing you those later. So how do we do that? So first, before we leave the base case, we see an option for the completion likelihood. So this is if you have run a risk analysis on your schedule. Okay. So what was your probability of completion in your risk analysis? So if you haven't run a risk analysis, you can just leave it blank. For our example, we're gonna go ahead and do that. Now in the base case tab, here's where you'll upload your file. So if it's a NetPoint schedule, you'll upload a NetPoint schedule. If you're working with an XER, you can upload another XER. And likewise, for the completion likelihood, this would be the probability of completion for your base case. Any questions? I feel like I'm moving a little fast, but I know we have a lot to go over, so I'm trying to. Yep.
So are you saying that you can take an XER file and run it without bringing it into NetPoint?
Yes, I am. Yeah, and the good thing is that the XER file can have 10,000 activities, and it's not constrained really by the NetPoint interface when you do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Sure.
I want to right now, if the project is ongoing and there is a as sold contract schedule, which is like a level 2 schedule, can we compare for these metrics?
Compare 2 schedules
Right.
using the metrics?
Yeah.
Today, no. In the future, yes. Yeah, we call that comparative metrics analysis. Right now, we only have one metric that's using that, but we will have a whole lot more. Yeah, but again, this is, I should preface, really the first iteration of Schedule IQ, and we have a lot in mind for where to take it. All right. The next step in what we call a primary analysis is our narrative checklist. So what we mean is when the schedule is submitted, we're talking about the schedule narrative, right, which goes through details of the schedule. So this is an opportunity for you to review the narrative and answer some questions about it. Like, what are some fundamental things that are covered in the narrative? Now, what we have here, the primary checks, these are all worth 1 point. This is a very simple checklist at this stage. Any of the other tabs are worth 1/5 of a point. So you can think of these almost as bonus questions that you can keep digging into, right? So really what you want to do is come to our primary checks and check your narrative. Is the author of the narrative a signature to the schedule? Have they signed off on what you have? Does the narrative identify key stakeholders who participated in the planning? Hopefully. I don't know. I hope. Right. And you don't have to worry if you don't know. Maybe or it's a no. Either way, you're not penalized for a no or leaving it blank. You can think of this really as an opportunity to get some extra credit, if you will, right? And I should also say, these things are really idealistic, and the core traits are really like that. The core traits set a really high bar for what is a reliable schedule. So this stuff might seem a little abstract, but you'll see that when you get the final score, it'll start to make more sense. I went through this, no penalties. Okay. So the last step of the primary analysis, we're almost to getting the score on the schedule that you see in front of you, is identifying whether, if relevant. We're not going to go over that right now because we actually have an entire session dedicated to that tomorrow. And the first two steps of now, as we transition to what we call secondary analysis, we also won't have time to cover right now, but they are. If relevant to your schedule, designate the contract dates. So if you have contract dates, you can now represent those in NetPoint, okay, in version 5.2. And you can do that using a milestone. And, we don't have time to go into it, but in the full 5.2 or metrics training, or even in the help guide, we have more information about how to do that. Very similar with resource flow logic. Now, this is a niche metric that we won't go into right now. But if you have cases, for example, first floor, second floor, third floor, and you have logic representing resource flow in between those, you can identify those in NetPoint. And that's something we want to know about for Schedule IQ when we're calculating the reliability of your schedule. So now those 3 points aren't for every schedule, so they may not be relevant to your case. That's why we say, if relevant, do those first, okay? So now we're into what we call secondary analysis. And what we want to do is tie off all the activities at the beginning of a schedule to a start benchmark. Now, this is just a best practice for GPM schedules and for working in NetPoint. And it's going to help you get a better score. Because typically if you have a bunch of activities at the beginning, open-ended activities at the beginning of your schedule, those are going to be counted as open starts. And that's going to penalize your score. So we want to just tie them off to a start benchmark. So this one we're going to show you how to do right now. Yeah. So what we want to show you now is the process of drilling down through the metrics manager. So this is the metrics manager, and we can see, as Sergio outlined in the beginning, the different tabs along the top. So comprehensive, credible, well-built, controlled. So as we move from left to right, and then go ahead and you can click comprehensive, and then move down. I think I have a slide here. Yep. You're going to be drilling down progressively into more detail. So you start really general, and as you move left to right and top to bottom, you're going to be getting down to more detail. Okay, so we can go look. What I want to look for is a metric called activities with open starts. Okay, and you're seeing a lot of metrics up at the top, and we can find this particular metric in the well-built tab. I know that like the back of my hand already, but Sergio can go ahead and search for it. Activities with open starts. We have 3. Now, as we move down to the dashboard, we can change and view a list of those matching objects, and we see there are 3 activities.
I just want to add, you can export any list from the metrics manager, so you can use it to find all different kinds of data for us, but it won't work on it. So it's a really great tool, something that is useful for most people.
Right, and if you notice Sergio did a search there, you can type anything in any list to find what you're looking for. And you can also blow up any of these lists to make them bigger. And like Renee said, send out any list you see out to Excel.
search will only search under that tab though, right? So
Right.
I can be clicked on well built and it'll
Right.
search well built.
Right, for now.
And you can adjust what the fields are that are included in that.
Right. I mean, all the typical column arrangement is available here. You can right-click, hide, drag and drop columns around, add them or remove them. Okay, so we have 3 activities that are on open ends. Sorry, open starts. What we want to do is just tie those off to a start benchmark. So Sergio can come here and add a start benchmark. First, yeah, we want to shift them down a little bit to make a little bit of room. Okay. And we can put a benchmark in here. And what you're going to see him do is use our new keyboard shortcut, Control L, and you can just select the benchmark and the activity and pop a link in right away. Now this is a nice example because there are only 3 open start activities at the beginning of the schedule, so it's not too bad. But
Will
maybe
it select, when you click on the left there, will it select the activity?
Yeah.
So we can just hit Control. We don't have to go and find it and reselect it.
you also have, well, you have to, no, so it'll find it for you, but then you have to click it. Yeah. So this is a nice example, but you may have more. You may have 10 activities without a start, or 15, right? Today you have to do it one by one, but we have features planned to make that process easier.
And what you may have noticed is that after I tied off those activities and then clicked back to Schedule IQ, it showed you a quick window that just said recalculating. And now that you see that, so as you go back and forth and make changes to your schedule, Schedule IQ is constantly calculating as you go back. So now you see activities with open starts at 0. There are no matching objects found. So just like that, we've kind of tied off all those objects.
All right. The next step is designating physical work activities. So we have a new interface in NetPoint 5.2 to do this. It's this is one area where if you're running metrics on an XER, you would just cross this off. You can't do this yet. Obviously, P6 doesn't have any label or field for saying this is physical work or not. We'll be putting one in future versions of Schedule IQ, but right now this would be just for if you're running analysis on a NetPoint schedule. Again, why am I going to bother to do this? Because some metrics are applicable to only physical work activities, and some aren't. And you can see a summary here. Improper detail, subjective duration. So does the duration of the activity correspond with my schedule level? So we look at physical work activities for that. If we're missing resources, that's something where a physical work activity, we want to have resources, but something like bidding doesn't necessarily need a resource. We're not going to penalize you if an activity like that doesn't have a resource. And calendar use, etc. So the way we can do this, in this particular example, we're going to take advantage of coding. So we've gone ahead and coded this schedule already, and this could be something that you do as you're building the schedule or later on, where we've added a code for physical work, and we've already coded ahead of time which are our physical work activities. You can find that in the codes manager, and you can see they all have a check in the far left column, which means they are assigned the physical work code. So we can go ahead and select all those, and then globally assign them as physical work activities using just the new physical work type setting. Easy. We're almost to the score. So now what we want to do is add our stakeholders. NetPoint 5.2 and Schedule IQ have a new interface for doing this. And it's back in the inputs window in the review and sign tab. You can see first we need to choose a delivery method for the project. And this is just because different roles are available to different delivery methods. You can see a summary of what we provide over on the table over here. And first what we want to do is add a revision. So we can call this our baseline, and now we can begin to add our stakeholders. You can think of this as documentation, really. So you can identify the key stakeholders in your project. You can enter them in here. And when you know that you have their buy-in, their sign-off, you can come sign them off. It's not necessarily send this file now to John, have him sign it, send it back. It's really a reflection of the buy-in on your project. While Sergio's signing off some imaginary stakeholders, I'm just going to go through some of the columns. So we have a column for target. So what this is going to do is pull in the name of the target in NetPoint when you signed off on the schedule. So that way you have a record. What version of the schedule did they sign off on? And you can go to the targets manager and see that. There's also a date that you signed it, and then another column for comments. So as you see, as he's gone down and signed off, you can add comments to any signature that you add. Some other things going on. Once you sign off, then the stakeholder can no longer be edited. It just turns gray. Once I've signed off the schedule now, and I go back to NetPoint, and I make a change, now the schedule may no longer be the same. So we actually make you just archive the signatures, and then we create a new revision for you. And then later on, you would then do the same process. And just a small detail here, if you actually sign off more than one person with the same role, we're only going to count one of those in Schedule IQ. And why don't we go take a look at the metric that this is feeding into. And we'll do the same thing for the checklist that we filled out earlier. We can go into comprehensive, and aligned should be, there we go, there we go. Open that up. So here we have 2 of our 42 indicators that you can see. Our narrative score, a perfect 10, what do you know? Because you just filled out in front of your very own eyes. And our schedule sign-offs, and you see green checks next to both of those, which means that we're doing pretty good so far. All right, so we're through almost the primary and secondary analysis. Now what we want to do is omit the irrelevant indicators. So of those 42, you'll be able to turn some off if they're not relevant to your schedule. Which ones? If an indicator cannot be calculated, you can turn it off. For example, this usually happens if it's a ratio and the denominator is 0. Right? We can't divide by 0. For example, PDM logic, or I can think of a better example, redundant links, right? So in both of those cases, the denominator, this is an extreme case, is all links in the schedule. Okay, so in the redundant case, it would be redundant logic divided by all links. If your schedule had no links, then we can't divide by 0. So you would be able to turn off that indicator.
Well, and a great example is if you are not using some of those NetPoint specific features like physical activities, you can uncheck anything that doesn't include that activity. So if you're using something without it, you don't necessarily have to put it in. You can just store it without it.
So the ones in the beginning when I said if relevant, if relevant, if relevant, this is when you would turn them off because they're not relevant to your project. So how do we know which ones can be omitted? We make it very easy for you. Just look for an asterisk. So this score has an asterisk on it. We can see in comprehensive and credible, there's an asterisk. So let's just follow the asterisks. We see there's one on conforming, and we see there's 2 indicators here, breaching finish dates and breaching start dates. These refer to contract dates, and as you saw in the beginning, we didn't have any contract dates in this network, in this model. So these are cases that you can just turn off. And you'll see that the checkbox on the left is how Sergio turned them off. And the icon turns into a gray circle, which means they're just not being counted anymore. Yeah, you can see also, down there, yeah. So if you're wondering about what this metric is, aside from carrying that cheat sheet, that printout with you everywhere you go, you can just hover your mouse over here and we tell you what the calculation is. So we have another one down here that can't be calculated, missing resources, upcoming overages. Okay. So there are no resources in this schedule. You see I have a big fat 100% missing resources on my physical work activities. But furthermore, there are no resource limits in the schedule. But again, we're not going to penalize you for not having resource limits. Maybe your schedule just doesn't have resource limits. So you can turn that off. I think there were a few more incredible. So all these NAs, these can't be calculated. These are the ones I mentioned in the beginning for risk, weather, and resource flowing. So we just uncheck them. One thing to remember is the omitting that you're doing does not save. So each time you open up Schedule IQ, you're going to have to do that again. And we do that at this point to maintain a knowledge really of what's going into the score as an analyst. So each time you open it up, you're very cognizant of what score you're getting out. Maybe somebody else opens it up and they haven't seen it yet. So we want them to go through this process. So let's take a look at the score back on the summary tab. So we're up to 56. Yeah, I didn't look when we started. I think we're down at 41. So this is why we want to go first through the primary and secondary analysis. Because if you just open up a brand new schedule and you go right to the score, you're not getting the full picture. It's partial, but it's not full. You have to do some steps to get a relevant score out. Now after that, after you've done this legwork, now you can come back and you can go right to the score and right to any metrics. You only have to do that once. Which brings us, how are we doing on time? To what we call now tertiary analysis. So now what we want to do is identify what are the worst performing of those 42 indicators. How can we repair them? How can we make our schedule better now using Schedule IQ scores? So what is a bad performing indicator? I showed a little bit, we showed you earlier with the icons. Every indicator will have a score and an icon next to it. So what we're really talking about are the red X's, below 50, what we call unreliable. Any questions at this time? Okay. So the best way to find this is to drill down and go through our interface. So we can see if we open up formulaic, we see improper detail, subjective durations, missing resources. These are all bad performing indicators. Yes, Tim?
It looks like you've got some pop-up boxes up there. Can you explain what those are as you mouse over items?
Yep, those were the definitions.
Oh.
So as you're moving through there, you can also see what these metrics mean. Yeah, thank you, Tim. We also have over in Credible a couple more. Schedule margin. We have that in flexible or predictive. See a red X. We also have schedule gap index. Big old red X. And over in well-built, we also have milestone density, benchmark frequency, dangling ends, open ends, logic index, PDM logic, etc. So you see, these are where you want to start with this schedule, right? Because these are the worst areas of the schedule. So we've picked out about 3 that we're going to go through in more detail now. Go over the definition of the indicator, show you how you could improve your schedule, and then go back and look at the score and go through that process. Thank you, Renee. It's very easy. Yeah. I can't believe I forgot that. This is actually the perfect time to do it, because you're going to want to know what was your score before you started actually modifying your schedule, so you can have that to come back and compare to. You can do that up in our menu, export to Excel. We have 4 different reports available. We can just send out the summary report for now, which is just going to give you the most broad overview of your schedule reliability. This is going to go out to Excel. I even had it number 7. I just missed it. And here we are. So we see a little bit of summary information about our schedule that we put in at the beginning. We see our overview over here with our definitions. And if you come down to the bottom, you'll see we have different tabs corresponding with the actual Schedule IQ interface. So you can come over to any of these and see a summary. And I do want to point out the use of the tree structure in Excel, so you can expand and collapse any one of these to see the metrics beneath them. And the color coding. Yeah, this is just a good report to keep. So, we'd like to look at a metric we call schedule margin. We have the definition of how it's calculated. It's a little technical. All we're talking about here is how much float do you have at the end of your schedule. The core traits recommend between 5 to 10% contingency, and that's what we're basing this off. We can find this in the Credible tab. Underneath predictive. Okay. So Schedule IQ is finding there's 0% margin. So that must mean our schedule is all the way up to our project completion at the end. So why don't we go to NetPoint and go take a look at the actual network and see what's going on. Okay. So this is interesting because this schedule actually has a contingency activity in here. And you see our project completion as the yellow line. So this might be a pretty common scenario for some of you when you're using your schedules. For Schedule IQ purposes, what we would do is delete this activity. So go ahead and do that. And this is what I told you earlier about after now we're making modifications to the schedule, those signatures may no longer be relevant. So we're going to archive them for you. And you can have them in the list, but they're no longer factoring into the score. All right. We'd like to go back to the inputs now. If you remember in the beginning, I mentioned when you're setting the criticality threshold, you want to do this in tandem with the schedule margin. And this is why. So right now, we have a lot of schedule margin, right? 56 days or whatever it said, right? Because we deleted that contingency activity at the end. But now we have no critical activities in our network because we defined criticality as 0 days float. All our activities are going to have 50 days of float or more. So, as you see, Sergio's already defined our criticality here to 57 days. And we can increase our near criticality now too with that same idea. We can increase it up to about 10%. And click Save.
So if you had left the contingency activity in and just moved or redefine your project completion, would it do the same thing?
Yep. Another strategy, yeah. Exactly. So now you can see here we have a nice green check. So 57 days is about 8% margin for the schedule, which is nice. And we also see if you look for critical, we have an indicator for critical activities. Pretty good. So, this is a recommendation, 15 to 30% of your schedule being critical. We're right there, 14%.
Why wouldn't that be green? If you have less critical activities, you have a healthier schedule. You're calculating and you're penalizing it because it doesn't have enough critical activities.
Yeah.
Means always less isn't better if you have no critical path, you call that a reliable schedule.
When you have a critical path, you just have, flow.
Yeah, so
It's a
we,
comfortable schedule. We'd all like one of those.
yeah. Yeah, but how often do we get those?
Well, that's why I'm curious why that's yellow.
The other influence would be the level of granularity in the critical path. So if you've got fewer, longer activities, that might also be an issue that would detract from the quality of scale.
Fair enough. I mean, if there's not enough people.
Right.
Appreciate that.
So based on the levels that percentage changes, that's allowed for, right now that range is between 15 and 20% for this level of scale, level 2 scale.
Which again is a large design and build project that have between $750 to $1 million. So keep that in mind. These criteria are set in that framework as well.
Right. At the end, this is being derived from the core trades. So, you could pick up a copy. I think we have a copy here. They might even go into more detail about the origin of that threshold for that metric. The next one we want to look at, we're going to look at two simultaneously, PDM logic and logic index. So PDM logic, we're just talking about start to start, finish to finish links, essentially. And logic index is number of links divided by the number of activities. So those are in well-built. We can come over to our well-built tab and look for logic index. Let's look for logic index first. Okay, so we can see we have 0.87. Our recommended range is between 1.25 and 1.75. If you haven't noticed already, we also put a little exclamation mark here when you're outside the tripwire. And let's go ahead and also look at the PDM logic right above. So 44% of our links are start to start and finish to finish. We recommend less than or equal to 20. I believe the DCMA also has the same threshold. So let's take a look at how we could begin to repair the network with these in mind. So with PDM, we can go ahead and look at our matching links. Let's take a look at all these links. Then the first one here, install earth retention system. So we see here a start to start, represented by this embedded node, down to tower deep foundations. So what I want to do is split this activity. I'll show you why. So we're splitting at 10.3. So instead of a start to start, I can split that into two activities and add a finish to start from the first piece to tower deep foundations. So we're adding a little bit more detail here. Instead of a start to start, a finish to start link. We've also added another link. So we'll be improving our logic index at the same time. So let's go back to Schedule IQ. Down to 42%. Our logic index, I think in this case, is actually the same, but this is the idea. So you identify one by one. You see maybe this particular relationship I could split off. I could model a different way. I could do it a little differently. And little by little, you're going to be improving the metric. Yes.
So you can hit the box and you created an open end there.
Where?
When you split the activity, you didn't tie it to the second activity.
So when we split them, NetPoint adds a link automatically. Yeah, that's a good point. We can show you that. If you go back to the install retention activities.
This one.
Yeah, see that?
Oh,
This activity probably already had an open end on it.
Okay.
The one at the end.
but these two
Good question.
were automatic. Then.
About 10 minutes left. All right, so we have one more metric here that we want to look at in detail. It's called subjective durations. So this is looking at physical activities, physical work activities, which have a formulaic basis to the duration. So we can find that by coming over to comprehensive. So subjective durations, we already had it right there. So 100% of our activities are critical, near critical formulaic activities do not have a basis for the durations. So what does this mean? We're going to take a look. So why don't we take a look at the matching objects? Okay. So we see an activity here. We can just take the first example. This is good. Come and double click this activity. And now in version 5.2 in the dates tab, we have a new interface at the bottom for entering a duration. Oh, sorry, this isn't the activity I want. Choose the next one. Start this one. Yeah. So we see a new interface at the bottom here. Now, you know the activity may take 15 days, or maybe your CM or whoever provided this information for you knows it takes 15 days. But what Schedule IQ is looking for is a basis for that. So if you come and check enter duration formula, this is an area where you can enter the quantity and the rate for that duration. So we can imagine 150, what is he putting, square feet, 10 per day. And that's going to calculate out to your 15 days. This example worked out nicely, but this is really a sanity check on your behalf too. As you're going through the critical, near critical activities in your schedule, it's forcing you to look at, well, what's the actual quantity and rate that we're working on here? Does that really correspond to the duration that I have in the network? Who gave me this duration? Is this a sound basis for activity? So we only look at critical, near critical physical work activities. So you don't have to go to every activity in your schedule and put in a basis for the duration, just the most important ones. So let's take a look at our score. So we're up to 61. So slowly but surely, little by little, you can imagine as we do this in a more comprehensive session, looking at more areas of the schedule, you're going to be improving the score of your schedule. I'm going to skip exporting. So we have just a couple minutes left. We want to look at some what we call reference materials at the end. Does anybody have any questions before we transition to this? Yes?
What was that deficiency count?
Sure. So this is a metric, or really a count for how many metrics this activity is failing on. So, yeah, go to the summary. This isn't even a better view. So expand now. So what you're seeing here, their relocate condo parking access is failing in 4 different areas. And you can see over here in a check which ones those are. So this is another method for finding what's the worst part of my schedule. So you don't just have, like I showed you earlier, you can go to the big X's and find the worst performing metrics. But you can also come see your worst performing activities. It's just another angle that you can use to find where to repair your schedule. Good question.
I've got one more on the
Sure.
physical work.
Yep.
Can those production rates be imported from Excel if we have a type of activity that we're doing all the time and we know that production rate? Can that be imported?
Good request. Write that down.
That's a good feature. You're forcing production rates. So.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? So, you all have a version of this in front of you. This one I'm showing you here is available on the web. It also has the actual definitions. And the back side of it has the actual, why. So this shows, well, why is this indicator important to me? And what's the recommended tripwire? So like I said, you can download this version on the web. That's a little more comprehensive than the version you have in front of you if you're interested. And now I'd like to go into a quick comparison with Fuse, the elephant in the room, if you will. We do not recommend comparing the Fuse schedule index to the Schedule IQ score. These are not apples to apples. The Fuse schedule index looks at 9 metrics, and Schedule IQ looks at 42. And not even all of those 9 are in our 42. Fuse also has their, what they call the logic index, right? And this looks at I don't know, 7 different metrics. Again, these different metrics are not necessarily one-to-one in alignment with Schedule IQ. So let me just take a look at a couple examples. Now, for this table that you see up here, we did a special analysis where we found what were the most similar 9 metrics to Fuse. And we only ran our analysis on those 9. You can't do this in the interface, but we did this underneath the hood just to see what the score would come out to be. So you see, on this particular schedule, Fuse gave a score of 87, which is pretty high. Schedule IQ gave a score of 37, which is pretty low. And the reason for that is, I'm having a hard time seeing this. This one. Not going to come around here. So, no, this one. Here we go. Insufficient detail. So this is a case where Fuse looks at the activities in your schedule, and they say that durations longer than 10% of the schedule are insufficient. And those are penalized. Our metric, called improper detail, only looks at physical work activities, and we change our tripwire based on level. So these cannot really be compared one-to-one. And you can even see in our result, in our Schedule IQ, 90% of the activities were of improper detail. Because we're also looking at activities that are too short, not just too long. And it's also depending on level. Whereas Fuse's metric is only looking at activities that are too long. And they only found 3%. So this is bringing our score down a lot. You can see other nuances here, like logic density is looking at the day-to-day forward in Fuse, but our logic index is actually looking from the start to finish, or missing logic. Right here, where Fuse's missing logic metric includes milestones in their calculation. Ours does not. So there's so many differences. Even when you pull the 9 most similar metrics together, there's still differences in how they're calculated, which is why we don't necessarily recommend making a one-to-one comparison. Interesting that the logic index is closer to the Schedule IQ score. So the Fuse logic index came out to be 92, and using Schedule IQ 79. So that's closer. We can see, though, differences here. So Fuse looks at just how many lags you have in your schedule, and penalizes you based on that. Ours is a little different. We look at what's called questionable logic. So we look at lags we look at start to start, finish to finish links with no lag. And we question the basis of those. And so you can see here, there's a 91% of our start to start and finish to finish links have no lag. So, just a quick point I wanted to make on comparing Fuse. And the last couple points here I do want to make is there is an interface in Schedule IQ for the DCMA 14-point assessment. If you could just pull it up and show us how we get there. So when you're running the DCMA analysis on your schedule, there's a couple things to keep in mind because there's differences. You know, the DCMA was defined for CPM schedules. And as we know, GPM has a couple subtleties to it that are important to remember. So, plan dates. Total float for this network that you see here would be 13 days of drift plus 9 days of float for a total of 22. This exact same network in a CPM schedule, to recreate, you would have to add a constraint, which means the 13 days of drift go away. We still have 9 days of float, but we only have a total of 9 days of total float. So, there are a couple metrics in DCMA that specifically look at total float. So this is just something to keep in mind. Maybe you open up a different DCMA metrics analysis tool, and it gives you a slightly different result based on Schedule IQ or a GPM schedule. So these 3 metrics are using this in their calculations. Similarly, lags and leads. So in NetPoint, there are 2 ways to represent a lag. It can be on a link, which is shown up as this red dot, So this finish to start link has a lag of, it looks like about a day or two, but it can also be on the embedded node. So in this start to start relationship, we have 11 days of lag. Similarly for a lead, there's two ways to create that in NetPoint. One is just turn off logic and move the successor back. And we're going to create what we call a negative gap or a lead. Another is to put a property on a link. So we can open up the link, enter a negative lag on it, and the successor is going to be drawn backwards. Again, we just want to point these out because there are lag and lead metrics in the DCMA 14-point assessment and also in Schedule IQ that are going to be, adding these up. So just something we'd like you to keep in mind as you're using other tools. Perfect. Any questions?
Yeah, you guys had one interesting metric right at the start where you said the percent complete or chances of you meeting this end date. Is that coming out of like the Monte Carlo simulation? Right at the start,
Yes.
you guys,
The completion likelihood.
yeah. Is that like a Monte Carlo?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the question is, the completion likelihood that we showed at the beginning, does it come from a Monte Carlo simulation, right? Yeah. So you could run, using any software, NetRisk has a Monte Carlo simulation option. So that would be something that you just type in. So your risk analysis tool gave you this XYZ probability completion. You come over to Schedule IQ and you enter it. Exactly. If it's relevant for your project.
Like, you could meet all the other criteria and your schedule, you have all the latitude things, but you're dreaming, thinking that you're going to finish on time. Right? So do you weight something like that? How are you weighting some of these things?
That's the secret sauce. Obviously all of these 42 metrics have a weighting to them, which is going into the final score. And I can't tell you what it is. It's like the Coca-Cola recipe. But obviously that one's important, right? Because like you said, you might have a great network, but what's your probability of completion? Or what if you have no stakeholder sign-off on it, right? That's another example where that would be important to the score.
And had somebody asked about open starts in the previous training? Did I hear that question right? Did we address that with the one of the examples here?
Or redundant links, yeah, or open starts, yeah. All right, well, thank you. If you have any other questions, just come up to us throughout the day.
So up next is Drill Developers, so you guys can stay up here. Vivek, Renee, Abigail, why don't you guys come up, get introduced? This is our team, and we're here to answer any questions, take suggestions, criticisms. Just remember, if you work for PMA, I'm still the CTO, so I can turn off your email. I didn't
Or
do
your
that on
Wi-Fi.
purpose this morning. Or your Wi-Fi, that's right. Yes, sir.
And the issue of subjective iterations, those would say, to clarify that, raise amounts. I came from the nuclear industry, and one of the problems you have there is if you're doing something inside the reactor building as opposed to something in the turbine building, that rate and amount is going to be vastly different because of the amount of dress that you got to do, the paperwork that's involved in getting to the location, and how hard it is to any kind of stay times in the location. That's, it might take you twice as long to work on a valve.
Right.
There is no real, is there any thought to the added time as far as what you're going to do to just get to the job?
So anybody else feel free to chip in, but the subjective duration question, I think, relates to, do you have a method by which you are calculating your duration? So if you have a process in place that helps you to determine how long something's going to take inside the reactor versus outside the reactor, then that's no longer subjective. Subjective is, I think 2 weeks. That's subjective. I think it on that. You guys agree with that?
Yep. So basically, all the rates are per activity basis. So you define the rates on each activity that is necessary in there. And what it gives you as a documentation tool is if somebody else is reviewing it or you are reviewing your whole schedule, you know that you took the right value for the reactor versus outside.
So the program doesn't, if I say it takes me 4 hours to work on an AOV in the turbine, and I say the exact same model of valve takes me 6 hours to work in another location. The program doesn't, there's no problem with that.
We're smart, but we're not that smart.
Yeah, we don't shift over rates between activities, so it is a separate
Okay.
schedule.
All right. Thanks.
Is physical work just part of the metric software or just part of NetPoint? Is it part of when you're building a schedule?
Good question. Yeah. Is it property of an activity?
Yes, it is now a property within the NetPoint tool itself that you can set. And that is the only place actually you can set it. But Metrics uses that property now to actually define which activities are really relevant as physical work versus the others.
Is it? It's exportable.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It'll be nice if you can do it importable, because you could basically build a schedule from a spreadsheet and just based on productions.
Right. I like that.
Project schedule on a work level, physical work.
Not really importable from Excel yet.
Yeah.
Question. Sure. The prior versions of NetPoint, under the schedule properties menu, there was an option for project completion time. And I see that now in the new version that was needed. Why was there needed maybe?
No, it still is there. You can still set it to be calculated on there. Yeah, there was just another field that got added in between, which was the near criticality, which wasn't there in the earlier version.
I make an issue with the version. I don't see it.
We can show you after.
Oh, question. Like in old P3 days, we had to do a sub-projects in EPCC JV environment. Same way, I was thinking like we have a main schedule as a level 2, limited to 80 to 100 activities, different area, etc., etc. But can we create something detailed? Nowadays, a lot of people are looking at a lean methodology, etc. So work packaging or a task packaging, and then it's task packaging start to finish, whatever the scope is, that can be mapped into this. So like on a site, they work on a NetPoint sub-project for task packaging.
It's
and whatever has been updated there, that can be easily mapped to.
Right. So what if I understand your question right, you're looking for like a vertical traceability with sub-projects within a NetPoint level 2 project. Is that?
Updating the site status, performance status to the level 2 directly.
Right, at this point, we don't have that multiple level functionality, but it's definitely our dream for the future to be able to cascade through multiple layers of a schedule and get different levels of granularity. And there are some 2 ways I can think of now that you can get some of that functionality. One is to use a hammock, where you hide the fragment underneath the hammock, and then if you need to get to the detail, you just pop open the fragment and you can see it, but it doesn't clutter up your canvas. The other way is you can embed a more detailed NetPoint plan as an object within an activity and then reference it, but they're not logically tied. So you lose the vertical traceability there.
Following on that subject of hammocks, if I have design and I got like 4 phases and I got them in hammocks, and then I would like to put a larger hammock over the top of that, I always find to say you're limited, you can only share one hammock. Is there?
maybe added a start and a finish milestone or benchmark to the beginning, you could just disclude them from the first hammock
Okay.
and make those members of your larger hammock.
Got it.
So you're just marking the total duration.
Yeah.
And all the activities were the member of the first hammock.
Gotcha.
That's the way to do that.
That's a nice trick.
I get lots of questions. We find lots of answers.
There's a prize for the hardest question.
So as we selected in the primary evaluation, as we selected street type and we selected a lot of things that define that network, is that something that's going to be stored locally where we, as we move on to another project, we make that schedule say 80%. You know, now that IQ is 80 or 85. Well, that's probably going to be my start network for a similar project years down the road. So I don't have to go through the same motions of making the schedule more reliable. I already have a sample that I've made reliable. Now I still have to tweak it. But do I have to go through all the steps to, can I get all that historical data as a file that I fixed and use that in the future for my start of my new network, of my new process?
So basically be able to like import the inputs from a previous project when you're starting a new one. Yeah,
So if it's transferring of input from one project to another, no. But if you're thinking of that same project itself, yes, that data itself is saved along with that file. So all the inputs that you put in for your Schedule IQ score are actually saved with the NetPoint or the XML.
Is there a save as?
Means it's a NetPoint file. You can obviously save it to some other name.
Oh,
So,
Right. And start off with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. You just can't export the inputs out and import it into another schedule. You are basically with that schedule itself.
Well, and there's a very detailed report that lists absolutely everything and all the lists that go along with every point. So you could actually use your detailed report to just inform the next schedule if you wanted. You guys are an easy crowd.
All right.
Ready for
Well,
lunch.
what's up next is lunch, which is just down the hall. So thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you at lunch.
Thank you.